Welcome to the culture trekking community, y'all. I just wanted to get on here. I know we're all in quarantine and just really begging to get out already, and it hasn't even been a week. So I wanted to get on here, kind of introduce myself, maybe give you guys some videos on how to travel better, longer, and save yourself a lot of money. So to start this off, I'm going to talk about how I actually research my trip. Feel free to leave any of your tips and tricks of how to travel better, longer, and for cheaper down in the description box below. I would love to hear them. I'm all about trying to learn new things and get new tips and tricks on how to travel better. So to start this off, we're just gonna go from top to bottom. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is a reasonable budget. You want to make sure you have enough money to splurge. I mean, you wouldn't be going on vacation unless you had something saved up so that you could splurge on things like souvenirs or that amazing hot air balloon ride, link here, or you also have to think about cancellations. Cancellations like your flight getting canceled, like I don't know, a pandemic maybe, or something like a tour getting canceled and you don't hear from them and you have to find out how to find something else to do right off the bat. You also want to keep in mind something for emergencies, again, like a pandemic or a tornado or a hurricane or an emergency evacuation. So I had a friend, just to give you an example, I had a friend that went hiking in Idaho. She ended up falling off of a cliff, broke her back, and then was in the hospital for about 3 weeks in traction, and she was just out on a hike with her family. So, and she's actually a really good hiker, but went through this awful experience, was out of work, had to come home by ambulance or, a helicopter, which is so expensive, upwards of like 10 to 30 grand. So if you don't have something for an emergency, I highly recommend travel insurance. This isn't sponsored to say this. I am an affiliate with them. I make pennies on what they actually get. You do want to make sure that you have a good health insurance that can bring you home safely, and also something saved up on the side in case you are out of work for a couple of weeks, like paid time off or something in the bank that you can cover your bills for at least 2 weeks. I know Susie Orman, she's like a whole financial guru person I highly recommend looking at. She actually says to have something saved up for about 6 months, but I don't know. I don't really follow it, but if you're into that stuff, I'll put her information in the description box below as well. Second, obvious thing, what is your destination? When you're looking at your destination, you want to make sure how you're going to get there. So you're going to drive, you're going to fly, you're going to bike, you have to go by boat. Some remote places in Alaska, you actually have to fly there, take another small plane, and then take a boat. Some other places, like when I went to Guatemala, I flew into Guatemala. It was a direct flight from Salt Lake City, but then I had to get in a car with a guy because it was midnight, didn't really feel safe taking their buses they had available down there. So I took a car with this guy. It took 2 hours to get there. There weren't really any signs. It's in this huge volcanic crater. It was pouring down rain. He got lost, but he was paid to get me there. And so he ended up getting me to the place that I needed to go. But I just thought, man, if I was in a bus and they dropped me off, I wouldn't have been able to find the place, because in order to get down to one village, you have to go all the way down these switchbacks into the village that's near the lake, and then all the way back up, and then drive over to the next village and go all the way back down. So if you're going to some of these more remote places, you want to make sure that you can both get in and out safely. Some transportation systems, they don't run at night because it isn't safe, neither for the drivers or for their passengers. So make sure you look that up on your way to your destination. Another thing on the way to the destination is connecting flights. So in some of the more remote places in Asia, or getting from like the US to Asia, you actually have these massive like 14 to sometimes 28-hour layovers in certain cities. So you want to make sure that the airport that you're actually going to be laying over in has something available or some amenity available that you're going to need with that long haul of a flight. So far, I think the longest flight I've ever taken, or that includes layovers and everything, was about 46 hours. And I just remember crying, thinking, I just want to lay down. I just want to find somewhere to lay down. The one place that I laid over in Atlanta, they don't actually let you check in unless it's 4 hours before your flight for security reasons. So I had to check out of the airport, wait in the waiting area, which there were only about 10 seats in the front of the airport. And so I fell asleep in one of those chairs with my feet up on a wheelchair, which I know it's probably not the most socially appropriate thing to do because people need those. I would have given it up, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, point being is I should have probably looked that up before I left to see what the requirements were in each airport that I was going to be having these massive layovers in. There are other airports like Paris or Amsterdam where it's only about a half-hour train ride into the city. Their transportation is spot on. You can go and traipse around Paris, which I will leave a link in the description box below to a whole article I did on how to spend a layover, an 8-hour layover in Paris if you're going that route. So it's just little things like that that you want to see if they have amenities available that you can utilize if you're on those long layovers. Another thing about the destination and getting there. If you're taking a cruise, and I have a whole video on tips for first-time cruisers, which I'll put up here. So when you're on a cruise, you want to make sure that the places that you're going to visit, it's important to know if they require a tender or not. So a tender is when the big boat comes in, you have these little tiny boats that can come in as well, take you from the ship to the land because the waters aren't deep enough for the cruise ship to actually dock. Make sure to take a look at that as well. Next thing that I've already kind of touched on is airports. So when you're going to an airport or your airline, you want to make sure you're actually going to be comfortable. Some airlines, their seats are a lot smaller and they don't have as much legroom. Are you willing to spend a little more for those longer haul flights, or paying for an extra seat next to you so you can have a little bit more room to kind of wiggle around? Another thing that you also want to look at when you're at airports on long layovers is if you want to get out of the airport and explore the city, do they or are they going to require a visa? Some countries, depending on where you're traveling from or to, require that you have a visa to even go outside the airport. So make sure that you look that up on these requirements for how long you can be in the city without having a visa, and what you need to do in order to get that, how much it would cost, and if it would actually be worth it to you. Speaking of changing positions, I thought I'd come over and just switch it up a little bit because I know this is kind of a lot of talking on the video. But the next thing I wanted to talk about is lodging. When you're looking at lodging, this is the most important thing that you can do when you're planning your trip. Because if you don't get a good night's sleep, and it's hard enough to get it when you have jet lag, is your lodging. You want to make sure that your lodging is in close proximity to public transportation. This is going to save you so much on your total cost of your trip, leaving you extra money for those things that you love to do, like maybe go hiking or take that really cool tour that you wanted to go on. Another thing that I look at is if I'm wanting to save money, I actually look to see if there's some type of park or area where they hold farmers markets. This is going to be really cool for you to go and kind of explore the different foods and tastes that they have available at the farmers markets. You also want to look and see if your Airbnb has a kitchen or something like that where you can cook your own food. If you're traveling solo or you're traveling with someone, you kind of have to work that out between yourself. I also, when I'm looking at budget-friendly places to stay, I look and see if they've had any reports of bed bugs. Now, bed bugs are on the rise. If you look at my Clink Nord hostel video that I did, which I'll leave that link up here, lots of information for you guys today. I'll teach you how to kind of screen your hostel, even your Airbnb, and even hotels have incidents of bed bugs on the rise. So I'll teach you in that video how to look for bed bugs and what to do if you find some. Something I also look for when I'm going to more remote areas like in Morocco, in Brazil, in Guatemala, is if they have hot water and if they have air conditioning, or at least a swamp cooler, something that can cool you down at night, because I have to be cool when I am, well, I'm already cool, but you know. Anyway, I have to be cooler at night because it helps me sleep so much better. Some areas in Brazil, some areas in Argentina and Chile, they don't actually have AC, partly because they can't afford it, and they're honestly just used to the weather. In Morocco, one of the things that they advertised is if they have hot water or not. Very unique thing about Morocco, by the way, if you go, in order to rent a hotel or sublet a room from a family, you will see people out on the street waggling their keys. This is to signal to you not that they're whores or they're trying to sell themselves for biblical relations or anything like that. It's more to let you know that they do have a room available. Some of them will have pictures, some of them won't, but that is the way they do it. So those cultural practices are something that you want to look at as well, which you can get on TripAdvisor. I actually use Pinterest a lot because Pinterest is usually travel bloggers like myself that have been there that tell you about their experience and what they did and how they went, where they went in a first-hand way. Some of the stuff that you get online on TripAdvisor or on some of these other places, they can actually be just paid content where companies can pay to put their advertising on there. Usually I find those companies or things that I find on those sites are a lot more expensive, whereas travel bloggers, and they reach out to people in it or other travel bloggers that are living in those areas and say, hey, do you have a cool company that we could use to get a more unique experience? So make sure to check Pinterest out. I do have one, which I'll leave that link right here. Another thing that I look for is what is the proximity of your hotel or Airbnb to a busy road, a train station, or a busy street. When I visited New York, it was really important to me to have that pristine sleeping environment of a quiet place that I can cool down at and has some amenities available where I can either eat or grab something to drink within where I'm staying. A place that I was staying in Scotland, it was an Airbnb where the lady actually lived right next to a train station. It was a busy place where people would get dropped off in Inverness. It ended up being okay, but I just thought, man, if this was any louder, like I would not have been able to sleep for the 4 nights that I was there, which doesn't make anybody happy if I don't get sleep or if you don't get sleep. So make sure that you find somewhere you're gonna get a good night's sleep. Some special things that I also look at when I'm looking at lodging is actually a breakfast are included, and if they let pets in, and if those pets end up having to have a fee with them. If you have a service dog, usually those fees are waived. As I don't have a service dog, I always look at that in my lodging choices, especially around here, Utah, Arizona, Idaho area where I'm from. With breakfast included, just make sure it's something that you can eat if you have specific allergies or require some kind of special diet for medical purposes. You want to inquire with them about that before you go. Next up, transportation. When you're looking at transportation, you want to see if you are in close proximity to that public transport. Does it require you to get a bus pass, to get there, a boat pass like in Amsterdam? You also want to look at how long it will take you to get something like an E-Rail pass, where you order the pass online. It takes like 3 weeks, sometimes 4 to 6 weeks to get you to you, depending on where you live and when you order it. Rental cars. Rental cars, if you are going to rent a car, you want to make sure that if you go to a place that you're actually going to be safe driving a car around. If you go to somewhere like India, Bali, Morocco, these places, the drivers are cray-cray, okay? No offense to anybody who is from there. This is just a Utah driver, which Utah drivers are known for being really crappy drivers, which I am not. but you want to make sure that you can actually go feel safe driving. There's nothing more exhausting than trying to drive around in these crazy areas where you get to the air activity and you just feel so drained. So make sure it's actually going to be safe. There's a lot of good information on the internet about this, so make sure to research your trip beforehand. If you're also renting a car in somewhere like Scotland, for example, they drive on the opposite side of the road. So are you going to be comfortable doing that? Always thinking left side of the road, left side of the road, left side of the road, like if you're from the United States. I did it alone. It was very, very stressful, but I made sure to leave early in the morning and go to more of the rural places when I had the rental car, because I was pretty nervous about driving on that left side of the road. And another thing is that in Europe, if you are used to driving a manual shifting car, most Europeans, most of the rest of the world, if you're from the US, they drive with stick shift or manual transmission in Europe versus automatic transmission in the United States. So make sure you're able to drive those types of cars. If all else fails and you forget to make sure that your car has that, can't find them, grind them, baby. Next up on the rental car issue is that sometimes there isn't anywhere to park, just like in Scotland. Edinburgh, it's an old city, and a lot of old cities didn't have cars back then, so there really isn't a place to park. If you're somewhere like Boston, you have to make sure that you can actually afford to pay for the parking. Boston, when I was there, it was $75 a night to park your car there, guys, and that isn't even on top of the rental car fee. That is why it's so important to make sure that you're in a place where you're close to public transportation, and also if they have something like Uber or Lyft available, or even taxis. I actually found when I was in New York that renting a taxi was far cheaper than renting something like Uber or Lyft. And it's because of those service fees and just how things are regulated. It's also much safer. If you're going somewhere like Argentina, they actually have banned, or you can get a huge fine for riding in an Uber car within the city. And it's just because of all the problems that they've had of Uber drivers actually taking tourists and taking them to a very remote place where there isn't really any other alternative, and telling them they have to pay an extra fee. Now, this isn't to put anybody on the spot. I'm sure that there are lots of places that have lots of scams, which I'll try to clue you in on those in those specific areas that we talk about. So just make sure, that is why it's really important to research your trip before you go. Something else I also look at, because of the chronic pain I have in my lower back and my feet, is walkability. How walkable is the city? Is it important to you to have or be in the center of the city? That's something you can look at for choosing your lodging or your destination. Right. Next thing to talk about, things to do. If you're going on a trip and you're going solo versus going with somebody, you want to make sure that you're being accommodating to what everybody wants to do. As a solo traveler, you can go anywhere, you can do anything that you would like to do, but I would suggest actually being back at your hotel or somewhere near your hotel around sunset time. And I have this as a rule for myself. Tell me what you guys do, or any of you solo travelers, what you do in the comments below on how you stay safe when you're solo traveling. But the reason I do this is because if I want to go out for a drink, or if I want to do something close to the hotel, I get tired or need to use a bathroom, being close to your hotel later at night, it's going to be cheaper for you, because Europe actually charges you to use the toilet every time. Cheaper to use your hotel or your hostel toilet than having to use something somewhere further outside the city where it may be a little bit more sparse in the available facilities. Something I always keep in mind is to not drink when I'm traveling alone. It's going to keep you safe, it's going to keep everybody else safe, and this actually goes for both female and male travelers. There are instances where women say, hey, do you want to go for a drink? They bring you to a place, they give you something in your drink, and then they rob you blind. So it goes both ways for both sexes. It's just smarter to have that drink either right next to your hotel, by yourself, or within your hotel so that you can get up safely to your room easier if you're in an inebriated state. Something else to also think about is if you're a solo traveler, is it safe to actually go outside your hotel compound late at night? When I was in Guatemala, it's a little bit more dangerous to go out at night. So they actually have you like in a barbed wire compound that kind of houses a lot of the tourists. And it's just to keep the tourists safe. You can go out if you'd like, but they really advise against it. So just make sure that's another reason to research your trip before you go, just to see what the safety measures are to keep you and your money and your belongings safe so that you get home and have an experience of a lifetime. Pace yourself. When you're going solo or when you're traveling with people, make sure that you pace yourself. You don't want to bust out all that energy of being on vacation right at the beginning of the trip. I usually try to plan for 3 or 4 things in a day. If I'm really pushing myself, I can go up to maybe 12 to 13 things in a day, depending on their locality, where they are, and how much it costs to visit each of those and the time it takes to do it. If you're traveling with someone, sometimes it's hard to agree on where to go and things to see. So what I have found works, and let me know what you guys do if you do it differently, is to create a Google map and plot out the points of where you would like to go. And then we take those and then combine that with whatever the other person wants to do, so you have a map of all the places that you both want to see. And then you can group them into different sections and see how many in each area there is. So for example, traveling with a friend to New York, we went Upper Manhattan, we went West Side, East Side, and Lower Manhattan. And then we just kind of did as much as we could within those areas, making sure to kind of trade off in between the different things that we both wanted to do within that area, just staggering those. Something else to think about when you're traveling with someone else is decide what is a must and what is a, well, I'd like to see it, but I'm not going to be heartbroken if I don't. That also really works when you're traveling with someone, is just to kind of see what is the most important thing for them versus what is something that they could live without in case you run out of time. Once you have a tentative plan of what you want to do, what you want to see, you want to get in there and actually look at the hours, the opening hours, how long something like TripAdvisor suggests that the time it takes to see that place and really take your time to explore it. When we went to visit Dunrobin Castle in Scotland, which I'll put that link up here as well, it was a lot. I could have spent the whole day there, and we really had only allotted about 2 hours. So make sure that you know and look at what other people are suggesting as far as what to see and how long to stay at that location. Once you start looking these things up, it's going to be really hard to remember and to kind of make sure that everybody's pulling their weight when you're researching all this stuff for your trip. So what I do is I make a Google document, put all of those places into the computer so that you can start putting those opening times and address, suggested time there, maybe the history underneath it, just looking up a little bit of the history. I like to do that because I usually do my own tours and like to have that history because obviously I do video, and so I want to be able to kind of spout that stuff off as I'm doing the video. One thing that I would also look at is it going to be cheaper for you to do the activities in an area a la carte or through something like a city pass? Edinburgh, it's definitely useful to do a city pass. Same thing with New York, which they have something that is called a city pass. It's going to save you so much money if you look and see if they have a city pass, a museum pass, or an amusement park pass like they do in Las Vegas. They have this roller coaster pass. You can go on certain roller coasters throughout the town. Doesn't require pre-planning if you're going to go and do a tour like it did with the Underground Coliseum tour. If you're looking at Broadway lottery tickets, sometimes you have to reserve even those if they're a lottery ticket, or getting some of those cheaper tickets to Broadway. Sometimes they require you to put in for those 2 or 3 months in advance for the more popular shows. You also want to think about if you're going on a huge hiking trip, is it going to require that you coordinate with other members of the group to see who's bringing what, maybe combine efforts so that your packs are actually lighter. So these are all things that I think about when I am looking at activities of things to do in a city. So let's talk about eating, everybody's favorite thing to do across the world. Eating is life. It's part of the culture. It's what everybody, I mean, comfort food, come on. Queen of comfort right here, hello. Okay, so let's talk about eating. I'm just gonna give you guys some tips on what I actually do. Take it or leave it. Everybody's different. Everybody has different taste buds and what they like to do when they're on a trip. So take it with a grain of salt is what I'm saying. So what I do is I actually bring the Insta Starbucks, because that's going to save you so much money rather than going out every day to get your own cup of coffee. I do think it's an experience to go somewhere like to try Moroccan coffee or coffee in Europe, or Starbucks Reserve. Those are all places that obviously you can go out and get those special cups of coffee that are more of a cultural experience for you. Something I also bring is protein bars or nuts or something I can snack on, especially if I know that I'm going to be experiencing some type of jet lag, because all of a sudden in the middle of the night or like at 9 o'clock at night when I never eat anything, I get these hunger pains like you wouldn't believe. So this is something that I always make sure to bring with me, just so that if I am staying in a place that is further from town or after all the restaurants are closed, I have something with me that can kind of tide me over until the next day. Something I also do to save money is I actually try to make food in my location as much as possible, grabbing little snacks here and there. I snack a lot when I'm on vacation. I do a lot of walking. I get street food because it is delicious and a lot more budget friendly. And then I pick about 4 places, even if it's like a Michelin star restaurant, I pick 4 places that I am willing to splurge on because it's a cultural experience. Otherwise, I'm hitting farmers markets, I'm cooking in my own Airbnb or place that I'm staying. Something else that you can also do when you're traveling is a cooking class or like an Airbnb experience, and this is where the locals will actually take you into their home, into a small group of other travelers that may be in the area, and they teach you how to make local cuisine. This is something that I think I need to do more of, just because I hate cooking and maybe they have some ideas that can make it a little bit more pleasant. So that's definitely something to think about when you're out traveling. So some other things that I would definitely look at when you're researching your trip is looking up a few local words, customs, and things that might be important to know before you go. Something I always use is actually Google Translate on my phone. AT&T, no, this is not sponsored, I wish it was, but AT&T has this, it's called the AT&T Passport, where you can use your general data from whatever local towers are in the country or even in remote areas, and it's just an extra $10 a day. I know there is a lot of different things available for learning how to communicate when you're in a different country. I actually have written an entire article on this, which I will also leave a link in the description box below about that. It talks about VPN, different carriers that offer what plans they offer, the reach, different translation devices, things like that. Make sure that you read that for me and click around if you want. I also want to bring up cultural practices. This is something that can be very sensitive to certain areas in the world. For example, if you show somebody the bottom of your shoe on a train, they can actually find it very offensive in certain parts of the world. Also doing something like this. Yeah, it's exciting. That's what we do in the United States. But in other countries, this could mean that you're actually calling for a horse. So if you're into that, no judgment, but just to be aware of it in case your wife or partner is with you and someone approaches you in their sexy outfit. would be super uncomfortable if I was a guy and that happened to me. So just be aware of that. Also, things to look up for different racial ethnicities and things like that. Racism is still present in the world. Some areas are not safe, so you need to be aware of that. There are a lot of people of color, different ethnicities that will tell you what areas are safe and what are not. Obviously, being white and female, I know what is safe and not safe for traveling for a white female, but I also am very aware and sensitive to some of my other travel blogger friends who are of a different ethnicity and do experience those racist remarks and treatments. Because we're culture trekkers, though, we don't do that, right? I hope not, because otherwise you can just unsubscribe right now. Another thing to think about is visa requirements. Visa requirements vary from country to country depending on where you're from and where you're visiting. So sometimes, like in areas like Bhutan, that can be upwards of $700 for a visa, and there are certain restrictions, like you have to use a guide for a certain amount of time, you have to be there for a certain day for a specific purpose, and they can either accept or deny you on that. And I do believe in this, especially for certain countries like Bhutan, where they're trying to protect their cultural identity. Other areas are kind of adopting this on restricting visitors, like I know Utah with the Big Five. There are a lot of visitors here, and they want to restrict people from over touring and really creating and causing damage to some of the trails here. So make sure you look that up on if there are visa restrictions or visitor restrictions on places that you're visiting. All right, that was a lot of talking. Thank you for listening. If you're here at the end, bless you. Be sure to subscribe to be a part of the culture trekking community. We love you. We are a great community of open-minded people who are all about cultural connection, expressive art, and unique adventure, especially my scuba diver friends out there. Love you guys. Be sure to stay tuned for the next videos where we're going to cover things like jet lag, traveling with chronic pain, what's in my carry-on, international travel, health insurance, and things to look for specifically in the plan that you choose, and then tips for traveling with dogs and how to do that safely and saving yourself money. So thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Happy travels, culture trekkers. Bye.